Alright, me. It is February 3rd. I know that much. And this morning I finished reading Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. This is another one that has appeared on so many of the top 100 books, top 10 books, and for good reason, I think, right? It's a very, very strong depiction of a satirical dystopian future, right? And then the arguments and constraints of both a completely totalitarianism world and then also a world that is completely free and is entirely based around what we would like to believe, right? So lots of very, very interesting things there. We certainly run into the issue of Aldous Huxley. I'm not sure if he directly is, but I definitely know his family was very, very involved within eugenics, right? And yeah, that's something that I think can be read into the book very, very easily. I believe Huxley, when he revisited this a couple years later, and throughout multiple points, I said, like, no, it's not about you. There's not a eugenics thing in it, but there clearly is, right? And it's one of those things of, do you take the author, who is known to have connections to this, at face value about this thing, right? So that's that. I think that this book often gets paired with 1984 in terms of, like, these are two dystopian futures and about totalitarianism, right? And I think I somewhere, I don't remember exactly where I read it, but it's best, I think, described as like Orwell's 1984 totalitarianism is this fear that, and dystopia is this fear that, like, no one will read books and no one will educate themselves because there will be no way to do so, right? Everything will have been erased, everything will have been destroyed, right? Versus this in Brave New World, which I would argue is very much like it's totalitarianism and control of a people, not because these things don't exist in the world, but because no one cares enough to read them or introduce themselves to them, right? It is a world in which our trifling pleasures have completely dominated us, right? And for that reason, I think that this would actually be a very strong book to teach at a high school level. I can certainly see the value in doing so within where we currently are. I would probably receive quite a bit of pushback because, right, the view of it is that, or the view that I would expect would be to look at this and go, there's discussion of sex in here, you can't have that, right? But what my argument is right, it's discussion of sex in the same way that sex has proliferated the internet, right? Of where every social media website and what we access and what we constantly introduce and what we spend our time on is inundated with this, right? And it has become such a part of our culture already that introducing them and having them read it does not change anything, right? But I also think that it Brave New World discusses and creates a world that in a lot of ways is very similar to where I think we currently are at, right? Of this, this idea that, like, especially with the constant AI, right? And even though it is a bubble, right, is it will come back around again, right? And so we're constantly in this very, very small speck of, like, we are within a generation of just people that are almost adults and almost have to be in charge of things, but then they have the concept of it doesn't matter to do anything, it doesn't matter to learn anything, it doesn't matter to make myself a better person, because something else already does it for me, and then I just get to do all these trifling things, right? And it's the world that people find themselves in today, right? And I think it's also a thing of where, like, if you make the intentional decision to view the caste system that gets put in place within Brave New World, right, and you instead choose it to view it from an economic lens, right, is that a lot of people now find themselves on these bottom tiers of the caste system, right, rather than this imaginary thing of where they envision themselves at the top of the pyramid, right, because it is this constant thing of, as described throughout the book, of, and then eventually gets described through this experiment that gets described at the very end of the book, of where you only put, alphas, pluses, or whatever's onto an island just to see how things would work out, right? And it's this constant issue of, if you put everyone to, and they all think that they have, and they can, and they all think that they deserve to be the top people, it crumbles in a way, right? And it becomes very unstable, right? Versus the stability that they have, which is everyone is already sorted into tiers. Your top people get to be very smart, but also they don't have to use those smarts, and they just get to spend their entire time traveling the world and doing whatever they want, right? And your lower castes are the people that they have to work, but they don't actually have to work. They're efficient enough to where all their time really could be cut in half, but then it makes them uneasy, right? And then the other part of their life is just spent on drugs, right? And that's the system that they involve themselves in, and that's how they just control people, right? And it's a view of totalitarianism that is, you refuse to allow people to move social classes, but also there are social classes, right? And you enforce these beliefs onto them from a very early age, right? Which is another thing that constantly comes up over and over and over again, is this conditioning, right? And it is this concept of, you can build the perfect society if you just condition people to never think, right? Of just to be very willing to accept where they are in the world and what is happening to them, and you never have to change anything, right? Everything's always going to be the same, right? Yeah. It is this fascinating concept of, I think very, very attainable concept for someone who's kind of at the age 16, 17, 18 of they are about to enter into the world of you know, and right, these concepts of what does it actually mean to have choice to do things, right? What does it actually mean to have freedom to do things? I think it's also very applicable to kids, because it is, and the age that we find ourselves in, because the entire concept and basis of the world is around efficiency and around making decisions that are the best choice economically, right? And that is not like you were poor, let's and we are impoverished, let's make choices economically. It is we only allow new games to be introduced if it will cause more things to be produced and will cost more to maintain than the previous game. And therefore, it is financially beneficial for us to move to this game, right? It is the efficiency of labor, right? Of where technically, right, we can be more efficient and therefore have all of our laborers only work 3 to 4 hours a day, but then it is financially not beneficial, because then more things to distract them have to be produced, right? It is, and it's all just based around this concept of like efficiency, but stagnation, right? And a refusal to move further and explore further because it might upset this balance, right? It's the faked diversity, right, of where we get described that people can have different ethnic features and different skin colors, but they're all clones, right? And so it's just the same people being put into the world, and there's no actual diversity, right? And there's also no diversity of thinking, right? Because they're all raised exactly the same way. So yeah. You also continue the economic exploration because of John and the reservation, right? Which is very clear stand-in for Native Americans. And it's very telling that in 1932, Huxley goes, yeah, these areas have not been we have not civilized these areas because it is not economically beneficial to civilize these areas, which then speaks to the fact that the United States intentionally gave the worst parcels of land to the reservations that they forced Native Americans to move into, which then enforced a cycle of poverty. But then you get John, and you have this, I guess, it becomes this battle of beliefs, right? You have this totalitarianism belief that is within the civilization, right? And then you have the belief of John, which is claimed to be the savage viewpoint, but it is really the viewpoint that we just exist in, right? Because the argument is that civilization is stable and anything else is savagery and therefore unstable, right? And it's this concept of what does it mean, what becomes worth more, right? Does society as a whole and pleasing the masses and keeping them as happy as possible, is that worth more than allowing people, as they frame it, the right to be unhappy, and the right to want to change, and the right to choose what they want to do, and all of these things, right? And what I think we kind of end up with is this idea or concept of like, of we want both, but we can't have both, right? And so it is this, we want to live in John's world of where we get to make choices, and we get to make mistakes, and we get to be both happy and unhappy, and we get to have passion and have feelings. But the goal is that we're working towards this world where the concepts of the civilized world exist, right? Of where people are completely happy, and we get to, right, we get to live in a world of trivial things, and right, it's this glorious paradox of, as described, if these are two choices, the glorious paradox of humanity, right? Of where we want things to be better for us, and we want things to be better for our children. And in doing so, we have to have and be passionate. But in order to achieve happiness, we have to destroy things as well, because we think that our way is the best way, right? And you know, the enforcement of a fake diversity of things, right? Of where we get to say, yes, we have all kinds of different people, but they have all been raised the exact same way, right? There's no difference of cultures. There's no difference of who people are, right? Right. John comes in and becomes this celebrity simply because he's from a different place, right? And he becomes this wild animal to them, right? And it is eventually what leads him to take his own life, right? Because he doesn't get to be seen as a person, even though that's what he is, right? Instead, he's seen as a toy, right? Or as something to entertain everyone else, because no one else can relate to him that he's surrounded by. So yeah. Fascinating book. I think it would be very interesting to try and teach this. I think I'll get a lot of pushback, but I think it would be very interesting to try and teach this. But yeah, that's Brave New World by Aldous Huxley.